and co-founder of IoT Now, and it's my really great pleasure to be your moderator today. Thank you for joining us wherever you are. We've got a slightly different format for today's webinar, with the emphasis very much on discussion. This webinar is brought to you with the support of Core Wireless and with contributions from global network operator BICS, as well as from Europe and US-based analysts, Beecham Research, and Momenta Partners. So, moving along, the first thing to do is to introduce you to our speakers. They are, in no particular order, Robin Duke-Woolley, analyst, founder, and CEO of Beecham Research. It's great to have you here today, Robin.
Yeah, great to see you, Jeremy. Finally seeing you.
And I'm also delighted to welcome Mikkel Schaffner, Vice President of Mobile Data Business at network operator BICS. Thank you so much for joining us, Mikkel.
Hi, Jeremy. Great pleasure to be here.
We also have expert input from Bill Kramer, who is Executive Vice President of Core. And it's a very warm welcome to you, Bill.
Thanks, Jeremy. Glad to be here.
And an independent analysis comes to us from Ed McGuire of Momenta Partners. I'm so glad you could be here, Ed.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Good to be here.
Now, please don't forget, everyone, this webinar is being recorded, and tomorrow you can access the audio and slides via our website at iot-now.com. As always, we really want to know what you think. So in a moment, there will be one of our polls. Then, after a message from our sponsor, Core, I will be putting questions to the speakers individually and collectively. We've already had questions from countries as far apart as Taiwan, Nigeria, El Salvador, and Belgium, and you can still send me your questions. All you have to do is just type your question into the window on this screen, and I'll put them to the panel in a minute, time permitting. Finally, if you are having any technical issues with audio or slides, all you have to do is talk to our excellent tech support team, and you can do that via the question window. So let us move forward. I want to go straight to our poll, and the poll that we want to put to you, the question we want to ask is coming up on your screen right now. It is, what is the most common problem with IoT applications in your view? You can answer one and just choose which you think is the most relevant. So we're starting that poll right now. Begin giving us your answers if you would. Is it proving the return on investment? Is it agreeing the application scope with partners? Is it integrating IoT data with the rest of the organization? Is it about scaling up after a successful IoT pilot project? Or are you finding the biggest problem is slow time to market when deploying the application? So let's run through those quickly again. Which is the most common problem, in your view, with IoT applications? Proving the return on investment, agreeing the application scope with partners, integrating IoT data with the rest of the organization, scaling up after a successful pilot project, or a slow time to market when deploying the application. So, let's have a look. Answers are still coming in, but we need to crack on, so let's have a look. The figures that I'm seeing are 47% for integrating IoT data and 42% for the second of those subjects, the first, proving the return on investment. 42% compared to 47% finding a real challenge with integrating IoT data. Behind it, on equal numbers, are those who are struggling to agree the application scope with their partners, and those who are finding it's a very slow time to market when deploying the application. Nobody, interestingly, picked the issue of scaling up after a pilot project. Ed, can I come to you first? Was that in line with your expectations?
It was. I would say that the challenges in moving beyond a pilot are really fundamentally tied to being able to integrate with core systems and also to justify ROI, which still remains a challenge in very early stages of the market.
Thank you. Bill, any surprises there for you?
No, I'd have to agree with Ed. I think a lot of it is figuring out how to take advantage of this technology and sorting through all the complexities to then map to that ROI. So I think it's pretty consistent with what I've seen.
Yeah. Robin, any thoughts to add on that?
Yeah, no, I think so integrating the data into the organization is clearly quite a challenge for most people. I mean, most people can identify the sort of data that they want, but integrating it into the rest of the organization is clearly a problem, and it involves talking to a large number of people, quite possibly, and then fitting that into the organization. So in the days of M2M, for example, when we had just simple applications in like a service department or something like that, you probably didn't have that sort of situation. In fact, maybe the proving the case was of more importance, but now it's trying to integrate, trying to get other departments involved. So it's perhaps not too surprising that we're seeing that increasing, and proving the case initially is slightly less.
Yeah, Mikhail, you're at the sharp end of this. Any surprises for you?
Yeah, no, so I agree on the integration challenge. I mean, there are many challenges, but that one is also very key because you need somehow to bridge the telco world to the IT world. So you need really specific skills in order to, let's say, absorb this amount of information coming out from all the various devices and load that into the various specific applications for each enterprise. So you can use, I mean, pre-standard, let's say, dashboard, but most likely you will need also to adapt for every use case your program running within the enterprise. And we believe that at BICS, the best way to achieve that goal is to use APIs. But that will take time to develop for sure.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Well, look, we have quite a number of thoughts coming out of that, but I think what I'd like to do now is move to, before we go into the detailed questions for the whole panel, it's time for a quick word from our sponsor. So if you wouldn't mind, Bill, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks for that. I'll just give a brief overview for those who may not be familiar with who Core is. We are really an industry pioneer and have been around for 15 years, back to the days when it was M2M. And we take the approach of a comprehensive portfolio of best-in-class providers and ecosystems to help sort through the challenges that our customers often find trying to map a strategy and ROI to a business process and the technologies that can help them meet those. So what we like to do is combine that expertise from years with the scale that we bring to the table in terms of a global reach and a comprehensive set of portfolio solutions and service delivery options to simplify that and be the trusted advisor for our customers. One of the biggest challenges we've found that customers experience in adopting IoT is to really know where to begin and how to proceed, not just in the technology choices, but how to deploy, operate, and sustain that ongoing. And so mapping those various components together is what we try to do for our customer base. So a little bit more, we're about 400 employees strong. We have over 6,000 customers, 8.5 million, approaching 9 million devices under management. We're the 6th largest worldwide, and the 5 in front of us are all large MNOs. So what we bring to the table is really a level of carrier agnostic and technology agnostic services that meet a whole set of industry-line vertical solutions. So we have customers across these various industries, and we can help them sort through what is the right device, what is the right module, the geographic reach, which MNOs can support them on which type of technologies, and sorting through not just the technology evaluation and selection, but how do you deploy, manage, and run that in a sustainable model. And so one of the biggest challenges that we see is helping the customers sort through all the noise and what's real and what isn't, and how best to leverage that in their environment. So that's a brief message from us. Jeremy, I'll turn it back over to you.
That's excellent. That's very succinct, and it puts in a nutshell what we're trying to tackle today, which is an understanding of whether or not distilling all those different factors is proving to be a problem. Before we drill down into the details of the Internet of Things, the first question I wanted to ask you all is about the big picture. Is the basic premise of this discussion valid? Is there a problem with the Internet of Things that we need to address? And if so, where do you see it? And I'm going to be quite draconian. I'm going to ask you, if you could, to sort of keep it to no more than a minute for the big picture and maybe 30 seconds for our later questions. So give me your thoughts, if you would. I'm going to start with you, if I may, Mikkel. What's your feeling? Is there a problem here?
Yeah, so, there are many challenges. I would say not problems, but challenges for every enterprise to adapt their models, their services to the new connected world environment. So I would say that they need first to learn, find the right use cases, and also find the value that it will bring to the end user. Because, it's not about adding connectivity to devices and then suddenly, you have a successful, let's say, business. You really need to show to the end consumer that adding this connectivity layer will really change his life. So that's really, what we miss right now. Instead of just putting connectivity in all the things, is really looking at every use cases to improve, let's say, people's lives every day.
Robin, your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that a lot of people don't quite know what it's all about yet, and there's an education exercise required, and then they have to apply it to their own organizations. So there's quite a lot of innovative thinking, really, to introduce IoT. It's not necessarily obvious that by connecting a lot of your assets, you'll be able to improve the cost, or reduce, or improve, or create new revenue opportunities. So I think that that needs to be developed as part of a thought stream. So, what's right and what's wrong with the Internet of Things? I think nothing's perfect, but it's been going now for a while, and M2M before it, of course. I think that it's a process of awareness, greater awareness. Also, things are tending to get a little bit too complex for the average enterprise user to make sense of. The solutions tend to involve quite a lot of people, quite a lot of different organizations, and that's a problem, I think. So they don't have all the information. Things are tending to get a little bit too complex. They probably don't know quite where to go for the information, and things like that. Also, the market in some areas has become quite fragmented. One of the things that we study quite a lot of is IoT platforms, and there are clearly a lot of them around at the moment. There's well over 500 different IoT platforms on the market. How does a user select one? I think it's got to the stage where it's really, really hard to do that. And I don't think that that's going to consolidate anytime soon. So I think that there's a lot of things going right with IoT. It started, it's gaining traction, it's gaining a lot of results, but it could go faster. And I think what's holding it back is perhaps a lack of awareness and a lack of a system, if you like, for people to pursue.
Ed, what's your view stateside?
Well, I would say that the vision, or at least the expectation of return from Internet of Things was oversold in the beginning. And this is very typical about the new technology trends, where Businesses get very excited about the potential of applying technologies, but as other panelists have alluded, there are multiple dimensions involved. Internet of Things is not a simple technology. In many senses, we're talking about connecting different types of systems across different industries. These are internets of systems that all have their own dynamics of industry-specific, domain-specific challenges, as well as difficulties of technology interoperability. We don't have a common standard for Internet of Things. There are standards that work for building automation or for manufacturing or for agriculture, transportation, smart cities. So in many respects, we have this cornucopia of potential that needs to be deployed very much on a bespoke basis in the early stages of the evolution of the markets. And I look back to the parallels really in enterprise applications in the late 80s and early 90s, where you really had to build out a lot of these solutions, prove them out. They take a little bit of time to prove out, but we are starting to see real success stories and very steady adoption. And I would only highlight that the steadily declining cost of sensors and connectivity, storage and processing is when you have exponential forces at play, you don't really notice the changes in the early stages. But I think we are getting to a tipping point where we are going to start to see big changes happening a lot faster than people expect. And when we'll look back on this last few years that have been at least modestly disappointing, we'll see that this is all just creating the groundwork for big changes ahead.
So, Bill, coming to you, last but by no means least, you're at the sharp end. You're seeing the conversations with your clients. What would you say on how much of a problem is there for us as an industry?
Well, I have to first agree with everything I've heard, and the way I would summarize that is this is an enormously complex ecosystem of technologies that have varying applications, and sorting through those different choices to map those to the right business process and the right geographic deployments is one of the biggest challenges. And the common barriers that we see, it can be summarized as what you know, what you have, what's involved, and then what results. So in other words, internal expertise that's traditionally focused on enterprise services often lack that expertise required to do IoT-based solutions. If you get past that barrier, there's normally insufficient resources to manage all the multiple vendor relationships of the various components involved in the solution. And then once you get to the actual design solution, the complexities associated with just the deployment and the management of that ongoing is often overlooked and underestimated. And all three of these things tend to end in a delayed time to market due to IoT inexperience. And so it's really, as an industry, our biggest challenge is helping our customers sort through all this complex technologies and make the right choices that map to their business needs. Because they often aren't certain, and there's a tremendous amount of noise out there and technology choices that sometimes sound alike, but when you peel back the layers, they're very different, and they don't all work for the business processes customers are trying to adopt for.
So it seems that there's a huge measure of agreement here that the promise of IoT being counted in the billions of devices, connected devices, at this stage, we aren't there yet. We're getting there. What needs to happen to get there? I'm going to start with you, Bill, please.
So to get there is I mean, that's an interesting question, and a lot of it starts with understanding. For enterprises, understanding and doing a self-assessment on their own readiness along an axis of their understanding of the IoT ecosystem and its strategy within their own business, and an assessment of their own internal expertise, and then figuring out who's the right trusted advisor to leverage, I think, if I understood your question correctly.
Yeah, you understood absolutely right. So self-assessment requires a certain amount of awareness and a certain amount of education. Mikhail, do you find that the customers that come to you have the knowledge that they need to get started, or do they come to you as pretty much a blank page needing a lot of help?
Most of the time when companies come to BICS, they know already what the use case for which they need connectivity for their devices. And basically the main hurdles they face is let's say the coverage and making sure that their device will work at any part of the world. And I mean, sometimes they really struggle because for their specific devices or for their specific application, they've been working with one mobile operator in one part of the world, and then they now need, in order to scale, to replicate the same work with every single mobile operator in every single, let's say, country in the world. So that's a huge challenge, and that's where we help, rolling out faster some of the successful, IoT use cases. Another issue they face is making sure that we have full security and making sure that the end user feel at ease when using the connected devices. So, we had a lot of, talks in the past months regarding, security at large in the overall IT ecosystem and internet ecosystem, and the same in IoT. So when you start to add, connectivity at critical devices around you, you really want to make sure that those devices will not be compromised and some, malicious behavior will not happen. And also we have specific solution in order to guarantee that the rollout will be safe.
That's a huge point, and probably could be the subject of an entire webinar on its own. But I will come back to that. And in the meantime, before I lose this thread, I'd like to ask Ed first and then Robin briefly what you think we ought to be doing. As I said earlier to Bill, what needs to happen for us to get to this phase of having billions of connected devices in the kind of count that Ericsson gave some years ago, saying 2020, 20 billion devices in 2020?
It is a great question. I don't know that there is a simple answer, except I would place a lot of faith in just the systematizing of and actually turning bespoke solutions into really replicable templates that can be applied. I think service providers and consultants that are working with companies now to really help them at the frontier of certain use cases. You think about predictive maintenance, and as you move from condition monitoring toward predictive and proactive and prescriptive maintenance, as these types of solutions get codified over time, the more expertise that we have that can be applied to domains and really transferred from one use case to another more easily. I see it really as a natural progression, and that once you have things that are codified and turned into essentially templates and solutions, we'll start to see acceleration of adoption.
Robin, anything you'd add to that?
Yes. So, I'm just going back to your billions of devices and what was said before. I think it was underestimated when those assumptions were made or those predictions were made, just how complicated it is for an organization to introduce IoT. And I think that that's been alluded to in what we've been talking about. It is a process that people have to go through to understand where the opportunities arise, how they can innovate, how they can change things that they've had in their organizations for a long time, and then do things in a new way. It's not something that you just flick a switch and you can start to connect a large number of devices all at once. So I think the idea of billions of connected devices by 2020 was always going to be optimistic, shall we say? But yeah, I think that, and there are other things as well, that the the connectivity to do that was not really there yet, because it has been more expensive than it needs to connect a lot of things in the marketplace. But now, of course, the costs are coming down, and the opportunities for new forms of connectivity are increasing. So I think as Ed was saying, there's lots of opportunities ahead.
Lots. I tend to agree with all of you about the underestimation of the problems. You alluded to this earlier, Mikhail, and I said I'd come back to it. In fact, it is our very first question. How can service providers guarantee end-to-end data security? It's a massive subject. I know we could give this a day and still have more to say, but we won't and we don't. Can you help me and help our audience with some key learnings that you have to share about how we are, as an industry, going to enable end-to-end data security?
Yeah, sure. So you need to look at the various building blocks in the IoT solution. So first of all, there is the device that needs to be secure. You need to make sure that when, for instance, a SIM card, which is in this device, is taking out and goes in another device, you can track that, you can block that and prevent, let's say, really moving out the connectivity and allowing, let's say, malicious people to enter your IoT ecosystem. So that's the first part. The network part, I would say, is the less problematic because it's pretty standardized. Most of the network technology have embedded security layers, let's say, preventing, let's say, fraudster to intervene. But then when you start mixing up various networks all around the world with, let's say, the aim to provide global connectivity, then you enter into a big challenge because all of those networks will have different security environment, and you need someone in the middle to have also a secure transport layer that won't be corrupted in order to carry the information from every single mobile network back to the application of that specific enterprise. So the back end as well, the transport of the information as well as the backhaul towards the enterprise and its own server must also be highly secure. So to us, the only way to really provide end-to-end guarantee is to control all the elements on the chain for the control of the device and the user streams or the data streams coming from that device.
That was an amazing distillation of that. That was the operator view. For the vendor view, Bill, can you shed some light on what you think we should be thinking about hardest over the next few years to ensure data security?
Well, I mean, the question being service provider, I think the first, you've got to step back and say, what do you mean by a service provider? And because they can only guarantee or control what's within their component of the overall solution. So it gets back to the earlier comments about it's really an end-to-end. So it's from device and application through network, through cloud and platform, and even into the corporate data centers. And so it comes down to looking at it from a component standpoint, but then you also have to look at it from the people standpoint, because you're only as strong as your weakest link, and often the weakest link can be in how the people who use the applications secure in their own practices. So you got to look at it holistically. What can I do from a firmware, from an API protection, from an application protection? I agree from a connectivity. That's pretty standardized, and you can normally lock those down. That's the least of your concerns, but you still need to factor it in. And then what's going on with intermediary platforms that might be cloud-based before it gets to the back-end office systems in the enterprise. And if you don't look at it holistically and then evaluate the sensitivity of the data being transported, you're going to miss something. And so the amount of security you apply to each of these really depends on how sensitive the data is that's being transmitted, whether it's corporate sensitive or personally identifiable sensitive.
We could easily spend more time on that, but so that we keep this moving along, because we've used half of our time already, and I've got a lot of questions I want to put to you. I'm going to turn to you now, Ed, if I may, with the second question, which was about standards, device standards. For a long time, we've been yearning to get towards a situation with connectivity standards, and to some extent that has now been achieved with NB-IoT and LTE-M. But we don't really have a great deal of progress to report in device standards, unless I'm missing something.
Yeah, it's still a bit of a scrum, and I would just highlight that the standards really need to emerge organically. You have to have really de facto rather than de jure in a sense. I think that what we'll see, certainly what we're seeing around low power wide area network technologies, both the decisions to use licensed or unlicensed spectrum. I mean, ultimately the market is going to decide where the demand will be. So manufacturers will need to respond. So it's a bit frustrating because you can't necessarily push standards into the market, but ultimately I think you do get pull in some respects, and we'll see it emerge. It will be messy, but I do think that it will be a natural outgrowth of market demand over time, rather than sustained efforts on the part of vendors and technology providers.
So, Robin, it will be messy for a while. If we're in agreement with Ed, I think there is a measure of agreement there. If we're looking forward, are we only to expect device standards to come through vertical by vertical, industry by industry, or is there some way in which we can accelerate that so that there are greater standardization levels achieved across the Internet of Things?
Well, it's hard because different verticals have different dynamics, and they're moving in different directions with different requirements. So, the device standards they've come from each individual vertical, as was said before. So then try to superimpose something that is IoT focused. There really has to be a significant advantage in doing that for each of the vertical sectors. So applying it, say, in healthcare and applying it in transportation, two different sets of dynamics. So it's bound to take a while to actually achieve that.
Is there anything that you'd like to add to that, either Mikhail or Bill, before we move on?
Yeah, so I mean, on the device standards, I think we have already a lot of standards in the overall IoT ecosystem. The big challenge for equipment manufacturer is to perform, I guess, all the testing in order to show the compliancy to the various standards, both on the connectivity side and also on the interoperability. And I mean, that's what could slow down the release of even more IoT devices. And then on the application layer, I believe that we will see more and more, let's say, large IT or cloud provider, or let's say application provider, embedding IoT at the very core of the, let's say, service offering, which will facilitate the rollout of new IoT applications going forward.
Bill, are you content with how we've described it, or are we missing anything?
No, I think the only thing I might add is, from my perspective, the biggest issue around devices is less about how they map between the device and the connectivity, and more about how you operationally manage them in a heterogeneous environment. And so I think the more we can get to device management standards, the easier it will be in these large deployments to manage multiple types of devices from different vendors. Yeah.
There seems to be a theme coming through about complexity. And it's interesting because that's, again, the nature of the next question. You as a panel, have anticipated it really well. While I've got you, Bill, let's carry on with that. How do we make the IoT simpler for adopters?
Well, it's really kind of doing the legwork up front, I think, and being that trusted advisor to say, here's your choices, and here's how they map to your business processes. Certain connectivity options, while it does make it more complex, it actually is helpful for the enterprises, because as you go into things like low power, you're making the ROI for certain business processes more favorable. But you need to make sure that those technologies will support the business application requirements. And that's the big thing I think we as providers in the industry can do the most of is bring that knowledge and expertise to sort through the mapping of these technologies to the business processes for the end customer.
So nobody, I'm sure, on this panel would want to stand in the way of progress, even if we could. Robin, what are you seeing as the necessary drivers for us to balance the need for options and choices that help improve the return on investment and the total cost of ownership for a product set against the need to get a quick time to market?
Well, that's the thing. It's from an industry point of view, it can take a really long time to get through the process of designing a solution and getting it implemented, and that needs to speed up. I mean, I think the whole idea of having a trusted advisor to walk you through all of the various elements is essential, and I think that that's going to become a more important element of it all. I think the days when a company can sort out its own solutions and implement it all on its own are probably disappearing. I think it needs to become simpler, as the question says, for enterprises to experience, and that means really having someone in the middle to make it simpler, because there's a lot of bits that need to be put together. The user really needs to focus on their own business, not on the technology. So they really need somebody to help with to make that happen. Yeah.
Coming to another who provides that kind of expert advice from outside and independently. So at Momenta, is that the same sort of view that you have, that there is a greater need than ever? I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Well, exactly. But also to build on the prior points, I think it is also super helpful when vendors and service providers do at least provide a baseline of partnerships. I mean, there's a lot that can be done to ease the integration challenges when vendors work with other partners, not just whether they're service providers or people up and down the food chain, companies down the food chain, to really think out a desired solution, a desired outcome, and pre-integrate to the extent that you can, whether it's by at least providing certifications or APIs, building ecosystems. I mean, this is certainly what we're seeing going on with consortiums. Certainly, the Industrial Internet Consortium and has been a model for this. But when the different stakeholders in the markets work with each other to anticipate demand, particularly around areas such as edge computing, if you're dealing with edge appliances or gateways, if there are certifications that you can bring to the table as a vendor, that really helps accelerate the decision process. And certainly the role of intermediaries ends up being even far more valuable. Instead of having to worry about specific technology choices, you can start focusing a lot more on business outcomes and then the organizational challenges that happen downstream from technology.
Ed has really neatly anticipated the next question there, Mikhail, which, unless you wanted to add anything to what's already being discussed here, I wanted to put to you, because he was talking about ecosystems and the role of sometimes complex ecosystems, sometimes less complex. But are large partnerships the way forward? Because they obviously bring a great deal of expertise to the table, but would one company at the core of it all, no pun intended, but would one company bring that all together, or does it actually make things muddier if you've got a large partnership? What's your way forward for the ecosystem, Mikhail?
Yeah, so we all said that the IoT ecosystem was extremely complex. We keep on adding new devices, new use cases, new technologies. We talk about different type of network connectivity. And so the overall environment is extremely complex and getting bigger and bigger, because at the end, that's what we think will happen, is that those billions of devices will be around us for performing every action. And there won't be then one single company that will be able to address every use case for every enterprise in every vertical. So you need indeed the very large ecosystems with the right partner that can really work well all together to make at the end IoT seamless. So when you have at the end of the day a device, let's say in the hands of an end user, it needs to work from day one, let's say all the time, in a highly secure fashion. And let's say for that, you need to really have a very strong company working in the overall IoT food chain, as we said, working together to make it extremely simple on one side for the end user and also for the enterprise. So that, if there is a new technology coming in, nothing has to be done at every single element of the enterprise. It needs to be seamless. And that's really, what we need to aim going forward.
So, not to put you on the spot too much, but just to explore your policy towards this, does that mean that BIC's attitude to this is to develop expertise in a relatively narrower number of core verticals that you understand and know better, or do you throw the net wider and develop expertise in all these industries?
So at BIC, we really focus on the connectivity because that's our core business, to provide really reliable, ubiquitous connectivity to every enterprise or IoT, let's say, players, so that through one single interface, one single relationship, they get entire coverage, whatever the underlying network technology or the underlying mobile network being used. But then we tend to rely on a, let's say, web of, let's say, partnership who do have specific application fitting the needs of every verticals, and then really provide, let's say, the best choice for the enterprises. On one side, the variety of application, and through our reliable networks with standardized APIs.
Bill, looking at Core's activities, can I compare what you're doing and ask the same sort of question? Are you focused on an element in the middle that you like to deal with best, the industries that you know best, or are you throwing the net wider?
Well, that's a great question, and I think it's almost a little of both. I think if we're going to help customers adopt this technology, then you really need to help them solve everything that they have to solve for through from strategy and ideation through lifecycle support and analytics. And there's no one company that can do all of those with expertise. And so we believe in building a strong ecosystem of best-in-class partners that fill in and complement the strengths that Core brings to the table, and really taking that agnostic approach to whether it's the connectivity or the device technology or platform solutions that help them solve whatever need they may have. So we definitely are a believer in the ecosystem.
Yeah. I'm getting a strong message here from all of you about the future role and relevance, continued relevance of the ecosystem, being stronger, if anything, not weaker. Robin, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so just a brief thought. I think as solutions become more complex, it's important to have the expertise in an ecosystem to be able to deal with it. So it's inevitable that the partner ecosystems will become larger. The real important thing though is how it seems to the user. There has to be somebody that takes control of that ecosystem and makes it work for the user. So it's not just a free-for-all. I mean, an ecosystem with lots of people in it, or lots of companies in it, could be very good or very bad, depending on how it's coordinated. So I think that's what it really boils down to.
Yeah. Ed, I've gone straight
if I may, Jeremy.
Yeah, Bill, carry on,
sorry,
please.
Jeremy. I just have to say that's spot on, Robin. I think that point is a good point, and that's definitely the approach that we're trying to take is help be that front point of contact for the customer to coordinate that ecosystem. It's a great point, and I'm glad you brought it up.
So coordination is absolutely key. Well, we'll take that away from today as well. I've zipped through, and I'm very conscious that we haven't got to all of the questions from the audience yet. Some have been sent in already, and before we even started, and some have come in during our presentation. Ed, before we go too quickly through the verticals, I wanted to use a couple of verticals for us to try and understand some of the principles that we've outlined in the first part of the discussion. We've talked about complexity. We've talked about the growing opportunities for wider connectivity options, bringing more value to end users. And we've talked about better, broader ecosystems being well coordinated. Can you look at the connected health as one particular vertical and say with any confidence how we can improve that? Because it was an area that was talked about as having huge potential in the early days, and while some of that potential has been achieved in the States, less has been achieved in other markets as far as I see it.
It's a tough market because there's the role of regulation in certainly in high-end healthcare devices is unique, and it also it retards the adoption of connected solutions. Frankly, the U.S. healthcare system, for instance, is incredibly complicated. In fact, it's a set of systems. What I would say is that we would look to the consumer markets really to pave the way, and particularly emerging markets to provide ways and templates, as it were, examples for simple monitoring of exercise and health, certainly, or health data and telemedicine as well. I don't think that healthcare is going to be standardized across really any. It may be perhaps one of the most heterogeneous regulatory and process. I would say process characteristic industries. So it's very hard to see universal adoption, except from things like connected thermometers and risk trackers and that sort of thing. That has to bubble up from the bottom.
Okay, right. We're going to go to 30 seconds per answer now, gentlemen, if I may, because I've asked too many questions. There's so much I want to ask you and would love to carry on for the other hour, but I'll get my knuckles wrapped. So let's crack on to the next question, which was about fleet management. And I know this is an area of interest for you, Bill. Is there something that we need to be doing that we aren't doing that would assist fleet managers on a global scale?
That's a very complicated issue that has pros and cons, right? Because when you say standards, that almost means how do I get to a single SKU that I can deploy worldwide? And if you get to a single SKU to get to, and you think about how this technology is deployed, every carrier in the world operates in different bands, and so if you have to build for them to work on every carrier, then you just drive the cost of your device up. And so there's probably some standards in terms of deployment and operating. I don't know if you can get to a standard per se where you can have a worldwide SKU. You could certainly do it, but you have to evaluate the pros and cons from a cost and the impact on the ROI would be my first reaction to that.
Yeah. Robin, briefly if you would, any thoughts on that?
Actually, I don't think it's worthwhile, to be honest, because by the time you've got a standard, the market's moved on. So I think that it'll always be a catch-up, and then you've got to ask yourself, what's it actually achieving?
Yeah, fair enough. I'm conscious of time, and I want to get to more of the audience's questions. Last one to you about questions that have already come in. This one to you, Mikkel. Smart grid is an opportunity for utilities, and obviously comes a time when users need to stay connected even though they may change suppliers. We're already seeing a huge headache developing in the UK in this. Do you understand that this is a problem, or is this something that we could and should have as an industry spotted coming over the horizon and done better at when we first deployed?
That's the big challenge when you think about utility, but we talk about also healthcare or fleet services, is really that when at the end user wants to change from one provider to another, or when an enterprise providing, for instance, smart grid services towards its end user wants to change from its connectivity supplier, then it needs to physically eventually change the device because it's operating a different technology, or change the SIM cards inside the device. And that's not scalable. If you talk about, smart grid services for billions of users, you won't be able to send people at every, users to change the device or the SIM card. So over the air is a no-brainer, or having a solution that gives you the independence and the flexibility to switch from one, network service or from one network technology to another without changing, the end user parameter and the devices, as well as the application on the, the enterprise side. And that's really key going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, there are so much more that I could ask you about that, and let's come back to it in another webinar. I'm not even going to dwell on this one. I want to go straight to the audience questions because there are plenty of them. And the questions that have come in, let's see what we can address immediately. One of the questions here is about 5G, and we get this coming up time and time again. It's appearing on your screen in a second. Sorry, it seems to have adjusted. I'm going to go with this one because the screen moved just as I was clicking. Encryption. Would encryption be critical in, for example, a case where one sends a few bytes of data from a tank monitor? Would the encryption have an impact on the number of bytes in the payload? So this is very specific to tank monitoring, but it's a broad subject. Ed, would you find that this is a problem, or do you think this is something we can deal with?
It just depends on the business case, obviously. With a very small reading for a small implementation, you probably don't need encryption in the first place. If you do, that's going to have much bigger implications on battery life and the amount of processing power that you're going to need. So encryption certainly does. The bigger concern is not so much the payload, but the power drain.
Okay. Here was the question that I had hoped to ask you before and came at me slightly out of sync. What are the likely challenges? Mikkel, I'm going to come to you on this. What are the likely challenges to rolling out 5G IoT services for smart farming in rural sub-Saharan Africa? We've got an African questioner here wants to know, and do you have a particular answer in that area?
Yeah, Jeremy. So, the first challenge is to have 5G connectivity available all across, the world, and Africa, for instance, is also a big challenge, as we have really large territories. So first of all, operators are now testing 5G, but they have not yet deployed it, and not to a very large scale. So I would say that, you have today other technologies that could fit the need of IoT solution, and one is NB-IoT, which is, let's say, more generically available, and also 4G. So 4G is already rolled out all around the world and can definitely, let's say, serve better to today's use cases, while 5G will be rolled out in the coming months and years.
Robin, would you add anything to that?
Not really, no. I don't think it's really one for me, actually.
Okay. Bill, any thoughts before I move on? Because I've got a question here about LPWA, which I do want to get to before we run out of time.
I don't think there's anything to add. I think it was covered pretty well.
Okay. The next one I wanted to ask about is, as I say, on LPWA. Why is it taking so long? Very simple question. For license to LPWA, why do you think it's taking so long for this to come to market? Bill, if I may.
Well, I think if it's specific to the devices as opposed to the carriers, because both Verizon and AT&T have nationwide LPWA networks, and T-Mobile is launching theirs as well. So from a carrier perspective, those networks have to get out first, and then the device manufacturers will build and certify to those network standards. And so there's a little bit of a lag for the devices in anticipation of having a network to connect to and get certified on it. I think that's some of the lag that you see, and some of it can be them sorting through in their own business cases which device models from 2G and 3G are best suited to go into Cat-M or NB-IoT. And so I think they're sorting through some of those while they're also waiting on the MNOs.
Okay, Robin, any thoughts to add on this?
Well, I think the situation in Europe is somewhat different to the situation in North America. I think that the implementation of licensed low-power wide area is taking longer in Europe to sort out, and I think there are interoperability issues, there are roaming issues, and I think that those are being sorted out, but that is taking time.
Yeah. Let's go to the next one, which is about 1M2M. How much of 1M2M standard has been adopted by IoT vendors? Is this something that is an issue, or is it an opportunity, or is it not really moving us forward? Ed?
I'll have to pass on that one. Thanks.
Bill?
Quite honestly, I'm not sure I'm in a position to respond to that either.
Okay. Maybe we change the question. We can move on to something else that is more generic. We've only got a minute left anyway. The questioner here would like to ask, there are cellular and non-cellular technologies for IoT. Which technology will lead the IoT? I'm going to go to you, if I may, Robin, for that. That's a bit of a curveball, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
So non-cellular technology in the shape of, I'm thinking this is talking about LoRa and Sigfox and other non-licensed versus cellular, which is NB-IoT and LTE-M technologies. I think that LoRa and Sigfox and the unlicensed spectrum technologies have clearly got the ball rolling, but the ecosystem of the cellular side is much larger. So when it gets going, it's likely to accelerate very quickly and move pretty rapidly. So I think there's going to be a very interesting period over the next few years of whether the non-cellular will compete effectively with the cellular versions as the cellular versions roll out. I think that there is a place for all of the technologies in the marketplace. They will each find their place in according with the types of applications that are enabled. And here we are talking about enabling a lot of new applications to get to the billions of devices. If we just stick with the applications that we've got, we won't get to those billions of devices. So it's enabling new opportunities in the marketplace and finding the right technology to do that. So there's going to be a place for everything, but I suspect that the cellular technologies will end up being larger implementations than the non-cellular. Personal view.
No, very fair. I'd love to ask others of you, but we are absolutely out of time, and I'm going to have to call a halt to it today with thanks to each of you. It really has been fantastic to be able to put a wide variety of questions to you, and you've been very sporting. The aim of the webinar, as we said at the outset, has been to see if there's anything wrong with the IoT, and whilst it's not broken, clearly it could be running more smoothly, and there are ways in which it can do better, and we will be, all of us, able to take some lessons away from today's discussion. Sadly, that is all we have time for today. I would ask everyone to bookmark our site at iot-now.com, and there you'll find the latest news, you'll find videos, you'll find blogs, reviews, events, and interviews. And tomorrow, you can stream this webinar from the site. Meanwhile, you will be able to check out our other webinars in a minute just by using the link in front of you. It'll appear in a moment. All that remains for me to do is to say a huge thank you to our very sporting panelists who've been prepared to take questions on any and every subject as it came at them out of left field. First of all, Bill Kramer of Core Wireless. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
And to Momenta's Ed McGuire, great to have you here, Ed.
Thank you.
Mikkel Schaffner of BIX. Thanks, Mikkel.
Pleasure was mine, Jeremy. Thank you.
And finally, it's a big thank you to you, Robin. Robin Duke-Woolley of Beecham Research. Thanks, Robin.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Great to be here.
Most of all, ladies and gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. We really do appreciate the time you spend with us. For now, bye for now from IoT Now.